All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And folks, I'm very excited to have a legend in the industry on the call today, someone who's been touting semantics for a lot longer than most people even knew that it was a data management concept. That's Dave Mariani. He is the co-founder and CTO of a company called At Scale, just like it sounds, at scale com, and they have the Semantic Layer Summit coming up. I believe it's the fourth annual Semantic Layer Summit coming up a week from yesterday, so on the 24th of April. And wow, it's big stuff. Semantics is like the conceptual glue that holds information systems together, and it greases the tracks for data products, which are very hot these days, as well they should be, because they are really helping organizations get value from their data, not just analysis or a dashboard, but a data product. So without further
Mm.
ado, Dave Mariani, at Scale, welcome to DM Radio.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I've been watching the Semantic Summit grow over the years. It's very popular with our audience. I can tell you, in fact, promotion we did for you broke a record a while ago in terms of the number of opens. So it was the hottest topic that we've done in, I don't know, a couple of years at least. I'm addicted. Can I tell you, I'm addicted to traction with marketing. Like, I love seeing the numbers go up. I get very depressed when the numbers are low. I'm like, oh, what happened? Something went wrong. And it's getting hard these days. The Google and Yahoo and these various communication companies, if you will, that provide the email services, they're really cracking down on email
Hmm.
marketing and they're trying to prevent spam, which I understand, but it's a little bit scattershot in terms of the effectiveness of their policies. But for example, I did a promotion for an event and I had 25% discount with this code in the subhead, and the results were dreadful. So basically, anything like that gets flagged. That's a semantic issue. They're picking up
Hmm.
in the engine that drives the actual communication. They're catching that and going, aha, this is a monetary promotion. Let's throttle it, basically. So, if you would, for our audience, for the general audience out there driving down the road or at home listening to the show, tell us what semantics is all about, like a semantic layer from at scale, and why it's important.
Well, Eric, just my very first company I sold to the first email marketing platform vendor. So I definitely feel your pain when it comes to how to effectively use that channel and the power that the big email platform vendors have. Well, so semantics. Look, semantics have been, and a semantic layer has been around since the business intelligence was born in the 90s. And it's essentially the difference in our approach is that the semantic layer has always been naturally embedded in the consumption tools, in the BI tools. So
Hmm.
every BI tool, Tableau, Power BI, Looker, all have Cognos business objects. They all have a semantic layer that only works for their visualization tool.
Right.
And so that's traditionally how it started. And then with the growth of data warehouses, we also saw some semantics move to the data warehouses in the form of reporting tables and reporting views. And so there's sort of like two different approaches to doing that, sort of server side versus in the consumption tool.
Hmm.
And you've mentioned Yahoo. So when I was at Yahoo, I had to serve all of the business of Yahoo with analytics. And I struggled because I didn't have just one BI tool. I had them all. So I had Tableau and ClickView and MicroStrategy. Of course, Excel was everywhere, and I had custom applications. And I had the business of Yahoo was we had our audience teams, which is each audience was a web page basically. So there was Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Finance, and they all had their own stacks and they all had their own data needs. And then I had advertising, which was broken up into search and display. They had their own platforms. And so all of our data came in from our web servers in one place, and we invented Hadoop, a data lake, so that it all was in one place. And then here was my team of hundreds of people that were basically creating different data sets for all these different applications and these different
Wow.
teams. And at the end of the day, Eric, nobody could agree what a click was or what an impression was. Those were our two main drivers of our business, clicks and impressions. And I can't tell you how many different definitions there were and how many different ways they were cut. So at the end of the day, when finance, Yahoo Finance compared to Yahoo Sports, the numbers were different and they weren't comparable. And guess who got in trouble for it? It was
Yeah.
me, right? Because it was my fault.
Pain
So
is a driver.
what I wanted, Eric, was like, no, I don't want the business definitions and the business metrics to be embedded in the reports at
Right.
that very end, because I can guarantee you that report builder Dave is going to come up with a different version of gross margin than report builder Eric.
Right.
And so what I wanted was I wanted to centralize that logic. I wanted to talk to, in my case, Hadoop, the data lake. And then what I wanted, all those different tools, I wasn't going to convince and change habits. There's no way I could decide, I could say, hey, Mr. Tableau user, I want you to use MicroStrategy now. They would have shot me in the head. There's just no way that was going to happen.
That's funny.
So I knew that I had to provide an interface to those people where they could have the same version of impression and click, but they could
Yeah.
use it in Tableau and MicroStrategy and Excel and all
Yeah.
have the same answer. So there was no solution, Eric. There's no solution to having that business friendly layer live as a separate component in the data stack, as a separate service. I wanted data as a service and I wanted to make it business friendly.
That's
And
great.
so since it didn't exist, it's like me and some ex Yahoos started the company 10 and a half years ago. And we were, a lone voice in the wind, honestly, for a long time, because it was really hard to break the habits of the embedded semantics in those tools. And it really took sort of that self-service revolution where now the business was creating their own, they're doing their own data modeling in Tableau, for example, and creating their own versions of reality.
Right.
All of a sudden, nobody trusted the data anymore, and everybody's looking for an answer.
That's it.
And
Yeah,
that's it.
that's a really good point. That's a really good point because that's what happens. We talk all the time about trust and trust in data, and trust is like culture. It's a difficult thing to delineate, but we know when we have it and we know when we don't. And when you don't
Mm-hmm.
have it, when you lose trust, it's very difficult to get back. And especially for business users, you get burned once, it's like a cat won't jump on a hot stove twice, right? You get burned
That's
once,
right.
once bitten, twice shy. Like I'm just going to go make up my own numbers, and that's what they do. You're going to appreciate this because I remember at the beginning of my career in data, it's 2002 was the time frame, and I've been working for a BI consultancy in Austin, and then we got laid off because there was a bit of a drought. But then I started working for just doing client work, basically working for a company called Qualaware, just
Mm-hmm.
doing some contract stuff. And he was talking about metadata management, and I said, I keep hearing all these different tools have their own metadata repository. I said, but wouldn't it be ideal to have sort of a standard metadata repository that we all subscribe to? And then, of course, you would do adjustments to fit your unique business model. But it seems to me to be it's counterproductive to have all these different ways of managing metadata. Am I wrong about that? He kind of laughed. He's like,
No,
he's
no,
like,
no.
no.
You're right on, but I'm gonna pick on a nuance there because metadata by itself is not all that it's not all that useful. It's a dictionary. Okay, great. I have a data dictionary, and the data catalogs. It's great. I have all my metadata in one place, but unless it's active metadata, in
Mm,
other words, unless that I can operationalize the metadata, meaning the metadata is in the it's in the query, right? So so metadata being okay. What is gross margin? Okay, gross margin has got to be operationalized, meaning that now becomes the query that's being run against my data warehouse versus
hmm.
just, hey, you know what? Over here in this dictionary, it says the gross margin is equal to income minus expense. Okay, great. But that's nice to know. But I'm trying to build a report on gross margin. And oh, what about discounts? Is that included in it? Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay, I'll go back. Oh, yeah, it includes discounts. Okay, what's the field that has discounts? Oh, wait, there's 10,000 tables in my data warehouse. where would that be? So that's where the rubber meets the road.
Mm.
So we really want to say that it's not just about centralizing metadata, it's also centralizing the operations of that metadata by being in that query path. Does that make sense?
Interesting. So yeah, so in how you deploy, and I've read about this and I think I have a general understanding, but as you're suggesting, you are in the query path. So someone who is doing a query, they go, I want to know what gross margin is, et cetera, enter. That query goes at some point through your metadata layer,
Mm.
captures whatever logic it needs, and then goes on to its sources and comes back and gives you the answer. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So it says, okay, the Power BI is asking for gross margin. We know because we have a semantic model that gross margin is made up of income minus expense minus discounts. And we know what those tables are. We'll generate a Snowflake query, for example,
Interesting.
that does all those necessary joins and returns that answer to the customer. And not only does it do all those joins, if we've seen that query pattern before, gross margin by month, by product. We'll create an aggregate table in Snowflake or in the data warehouse, in the data platform. And so
Interesting.
that you're not going to be scanning 100
Right.
billion rows of sales data every single time you ask that question.
Right.
Instead, you'll be hitting an aggregate table that may have, 1,000 rows. And so not only do you get the answer that's correct, you get it at the speed of thought,
Hmm. Yeah, and
which,
that speed is just is crucial because especially these days, because people have become addicted to fast responses. And so when you don't get a
Mhm.
fast response, what do? You go on and you do something else, right? You just find some other way. So that speed and performance is what data models are all about. If you get right down
Mhm.
to it, a data model is designed to deliver the right data at the right time as fast as possible. And as you suggest, creating this aggregate table solves a huge problem because a lot of people who are using the technology may not realize it's like what is select star. Like, let's go ahead and do like
Yeah.
select star
Yeah.
dot star. Like, give me everything. Okay, that's gonna be
Yeah,
fun.
and Eric, let's peel that onion a little bit because I'm old enough to remember OLAP, and OLAP was magical because it had that business friendly semantic layer, but also that speed of thought,
Mm-hmm.
query performance. And then that technology just didn't scale because it pre-computed basically. You had to build a cube where
Mm-hmm.
every single piece of data had to be compiled so that any kind of question asked would be able to be delivered in almost like a spreadsheet fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that died, we moved to okay, now you got to model your data and you got to build it into a tablet dashboard before you ask the question, you got to go and figure out all those tables and what the relationships are. And oh gosh, now the speed sucks
Right.
because now it's not pre-computed, right? Now I am accessing 100 billion rows. So
Right.
then guess what we did? We said, Tableau said, oh, I got an answer for that. We're going to go and we're going to create a data extract. And Power BI says, we're going to do import mode. So basically, they took what was OLAP back in the 90s, where you pre computed it server
Interesting.
side,
Right.
and now you're pre computing it client side. And all because of getting that speed of thought back. And
Right.
so that was also because I experienced the love of speed of thought, and I also experienced how poor it was when you do direct query. We knew that the semantic layer platform had to perform like OLAP, but in a modern architecture that used these modern data platforms for scale.
That's
And so
interesting.
it's the best of both worlds. Forget about import mode and data extracts. Those are evil because those copy data and they copy
Those are
data at the
evil.
client. They're evil. I will say
That's
that.
That's funny. No, well,
Don't do it.
you're right. So workarounds. What I've heard a lot of
Mm-hmm.
funny quotes on this show over the years, and one of the funniest quotes I've heard, which I really love, is that in IT we always think one more layer of abstraction will solve all our problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you really have solved a lot of problems with this layer of abstraction because you can look at what the vendors are doing on the Snowflake side or the other major providers and leverage that and you can also see what the business needs, right? So instead of having to make every change in Snowflake, for example, and you're seeing this with a lot of different companies. Some friends of mine, DataOps.live, they're doing this
Mm-hmm.
stuff where they turn Snowflake into a programmable engine, which is like,
Hmm.
wow, that's pretty cool. But you're
Hmm.
able to address so many different specific bespoke business needs in this layer of abstraction because you're managing the semantics and you're actually managing the rules that drive the functions, right?
Yeah, I know, and I would argue that the architecture is so important because when we started the company, a lot of companies were reinventing sort of OLAP, but they were still doing that old style import mode, right? In other words, well, let me take all the data and I'm going to make it and put it in a format that's going to be really fast. And that we said, no way. Our bet was that we were going to stand on the shoulders of the Snowflakes and the BigQueries and the
Hmm.
Databricks because our bet was that they were going to make those cloud platforms, basically infinitely scalable and performant enough that
Hmm.
if we added the special sauce of intelligently creating those aggregates in their data platform, that we were going to be able to deliver the kind of speed of thought performance that we knew
Interesting.
customers demanded. And we placed that bet, and we've been right. We've been right. So I mean, but that was it was a scary bet because back when we started, there was no Snowflake or BigQuery or Databricks yet. It was Hadoop.
Hmm.
And so, and we know, well, nobody talks about Hadoop anymore, right, Eric? But we luckily we saw the growth of these cloud data platform vendors like Snowflake, BigQuery, and from Google and Databricks and et cetera, and that's now a reality.
Yeah.
So we were able to sort of stick around and sort of make that transition from on-prem data lake into cloud data warehouses
Yeah.
and get even better in the process.
That's great. Yeah, the elephant that was in the room, right? Hadoop.
Yeah.
It's we've talked a lot about it on this show. I watched that very carefully. I could tell you stories about what I heard and what I saw happening and the questions that I had and how they were dismissed outright. And then guess what? It turns out I was right about a couple things at least. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back talking to Dave Mariani of At Scale. And the Semantic Summit is coming up on April 24th. We'll be right back. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking to Dave Mariani of At Scale. And the big Semantic Summit is coming up on April 24th. Hop online to atscale.com. I'm sure you'll be prompted to register for that. And Dave, I'll bring it back in. We're talking about data products. I think that's really the best place to focus our attention because there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
talk about data mesh over the past couple of
Mm-hmm.
years. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, I mean, I have great respect for uh, Zhamak Dehghani, very, very
Mm-hmm.
smart lady. I think I understand what they're doing, but it's hard to explain. I think it's pretty hard to engineer. And I remember when I did a show with her last year, I did a Google search right before the show on data mesh. And what did I
Mm-hmm.
find? But 27 different sponsored links of different vendors all telling you what data mesh was. And I was like, that's kind of a semantic issue now. You have all these different definitions of what it is. What is this freaking thing? And I think that's why some of the enthusiasm has faded. Because first of all, that's a pretty tough engineering challenge to pull off what they're trying to do. And I was thinking they got to get some investment or something. And Sanjeev Mohan was like, that's actually a pretty good observation. Like I've been around for a while, right? But now the focus is on data products. And I think that's a better focus because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you got there as long as it's governed and you can audit things and so forth. The key is to get the business to understand what a data product is and then start using it. So, for the benefit of our audience, can you give a few examples of data products and what you mean by that when you use the word?
Yeah. So first of all, I got an axe to grind on the whole data mesh thing. The same way you did is that what people confuse. So vendors are always looking for the hot term.
Right.
And they're going to call their company, oh, we do data mesh. And the whole point of data mesh was not, it wasn't a technology. It was supposed to be an organizing principle.
Right.
It was how you organized your teams. And what the concept behind domains, meaning the business units. So I just told you about Yahoo, right? So my domains would have been Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports and Yahoo Front Page, as well as search and display. those are my domains. And the idea is that you want to organize your data product creation so that you can decentralize it, because so we can get away from this whole model of IT having to deliver data products to the business, to the
Right.
domains, to
Right.
those business units. And so I think that's a fantastic idea. And it's what I was trying to achieve at Yahoo.
Hmm.
But I didn't have the tools to make that happen. And what was missing was the ability to create those collaboratively create those semantic models using common semantic objects.
Hmm.
And so what I mean by that, Eric, is that all of those domains have commonalities, right? Everybody needs to report on time. And you want time to be the same. I know that sounds really silly. Okay, how could time be different? If you're a retailer, time is different because holiday seasons are different lengths
Right.
each year. But you need to normalize that so you can compare year over year results between 2024 Christmas holiday season and 2023. So it's really important to have these common sort of objects like time or like geography. I have different business units that report into different regions that report into different owners. I have products. I have a product hierarchy. I got SKUs, and those SKUs roll up into lines. Those lines roll up into groups, and they're owned by people. So there's all these sort of common ways that you need to structure your data, and you don't need everybody to be doing their own thing.
Hmm.
So the idea here is I like to call it hub and spoke, not data mesh. I think data mesh is confusing. What I mean by hub and spoke is that you still need the hub, which is IT, which is still sort of operating this like kind of like the rules of the road. They're the guys who are like the traffic cop. But the spokes are those business units, those domains. And those spokes should be able to create their own data products
Hmm.
using common semantic objects that they can stitch together to create their own data products that work for them. And they should be able to author those themselves. They
Hmm.
shouldn't have to rely on IT to do it. So, but you can't get rid of IT. So where I don't like Zamek's data mesh concept is she had no center of excellence, no central data team. You still need to have somebody who's picking the common tools and the common standards, and also just being the traffic cop of okay, you want to make a change to the product dimension or the product hierarchy? Okay, um, is you okay with it? Yeah, you're okay with it. Okay, yeah, we're gonna make you. You got to have somebody who's the traffic cop, and
Right.
so the hub and spoke. If I were to do it again, Eric, I would do a hub and spoke, but I would do, and it's not a shameless plug. I swear to God, you have to have a semantic layer in the middle there
Right.
because you got to have the common language for the spokes to collaborate.
Right.
And you got to use a center of excellence or a central team to be the governance center. Because if you just do decentralization, we've seen how that went,
Right.
right? We lost trust in the data because everybody was doing their own thing. We saw what it meant when you had IT own everything. It became a bottleneck, and everybody hated them.
Right.
And it was not fast enough, and they didn't understand the business. So you had people trying to create products for the business who didn't understand the business. I think a hub and spoke is the right way to create data products, and it's doing it with decentralization, but with governance.
Yeah, well, so in the hub, you have these semantic objects that then
Mm-hmm.
the spokes can go and assemble as needed. So if I'm in finance, I want to know the numbers, I want to know the sales, I want to know the expenses. If I'm in marketing, I want to know other things. I may want to know the gross margin on the product, so I know what to focus on selling, for example. But there are other dimensions that not everybody needs, but I
Mm-hmm.
need them. So from a
Mm-hmm.
performance perspective, it's much better to have this hub and spoke architecture because again, you're only dealing with the data that is important to you, to your data product, and that's what enables proficiency. That's what gets people to trust the data and the systems. I mean, I get it. That's the basic idea, right?
Yeah, and that's because that's your domain. You're in marketing. You own campaigns because you're running marketing campaigns. You understand campaigns. You own the campaign object.
Hmm.
But you know what? if you need to do an ROI by campaign, oh shoot, I need the cost data for running that campaign. And maybe that's in finance, and finance has those
Right,
numbers.
right.
Finance can give you the cost equation that you can plug into your campaign performance, and now you have ROI by campaign. And so you don't have to understand how those costs were computed because finance does. Finance knows that there's your head count that they have to amortize. There's the cost of the media. There's the cost of the building you're sitting in, and that's all the all-in cost of running that campaign. And only they know that. But you don't
Right.
have to know the details because that's their domain. But you can still leverage and share in those details and put these things together to get the insights that you need without having to understand somebody else's business.
Yeah, right. No, that's just an excellent point. That's exactly right. There are times when you'll need something from this department, this domain, that domain, but most of it is going to be in your purview, and most of it is what you understand. Let me ask you this question. You mentioned data catalogs, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
so semantic engine is managing the meaning of things, and this is what data catalogs are also trying to do. Do you align with data catalogs, or is there a lot of overlap between what they're trying to do? I know there's a lot of different ones out there, but just as a general conceptual model, data catalogs are doing a fair amount of what you're doing, but it seems to be a bit more transactional in nature or in the query path, as you suggest. Can you like delineate between these two worlds?
Yeah. But first of all, we share our metadata with the enterprise data catalogs. And the way that our customers use those enterprise data catalogs is almost like the front door. It's the search engine to
Hmm.
find the semantic models that will answer their business question. And so that's very valuable because it allows them to sort of cut across all the data assets in the company and be able to find what they need, but it doesn't do the operational stuff, Eric. So it's really at the end of the day is like the big difference is that the semantic layer is operationalizing that metadata. And the enterprise data catalog is the front door or the search engine to find what you need in the semantic objects or semantic models that are
I
going to
see.
answer your question. So it's kind of like it's really sort of a nice companionship. I mean, they're not competitive. They're really
Right.
complementary technologies.
Yeah, and this conversation has been going on for a while now, and then there are related conversations like data governance. You kind of hinted at
Mm-hmm.
that as well. And access layers provide a control point. I spent a number of years in the risk management field. We talk a lot about control points. At what point can someone or something, some machine or
Mm-hmm.
algorithm step in and go, "Hey, wait a second, maybe we should do this or that." And control points are very, very important. And you have a lot of that in your layer because you are the semantic operational abstraction through which all these queries are going, right? Do you find that a fair amount of governance actually runs through what you do, or is that typically some other function?
Well, that's a really great topic. So let's just drill down on that a little bit because since in a semantic layer, since you're creating new constructs, you're creating new calculations on top of your raw data. And
Hmm.
so you have to be able to secure access to those and mask those and do all that good stuff. But a lot of customers have spent a lot of time putting in controls in their data platform, in their
Hmm.
Snowflakes and their Databricks and their BigQuery.
Right.
So the answer is not either or. The answer is yes, both. So the semantic layer needs to respect the governance rules applied in the data platform, which means
Interesting.
and the only way you can do that, Eric, is you got to connect and run a query as that user. So if Dave is using Tableau, talking to the semantic layer as Dave, then the semantic layer needs to talk to Snowflake as Dave, because those rules are all tied to users and groups, and you have to respect that. At the same time, the Snowflake knows nothing about gross margin. It just knows, it has that data somewhere in a bunch of different tables. The
Right.
semantic layer knows what gross margin is. And guess what? Gross margin might be sensitive. So Dave might not be able to see gross margin. Only finance Eric can see gross margin.
I
And
see.
so that gets secured there as well, right? So you got to have both. You got to secure the business layer and you
Hmm.
got to secure the technical layer.
Hmm. And I'm guessing a lot of that would come through like Active Directory or LDAP or something
Hmm.
like that, role management. I mean, ideally, that's what you would do is you would have a profile for user X, Dave or Sally, whoever, and then when they get upgraded somehow, that gives them more access. I mean, it gets very cumbersome to manage that stuff manually across large teams, which is why you want these semantic layers, right? So you have a marshaling area for the aggregates and for the meaning of the objects in your environment. The more you can draw discrete lines around functions and processes, I think,
Hmm.
the more clear it becomes and the easier it is to manage over time, right?
Yeah, and you touched on something, which is like, so the semantic layer shouldn't own the directory of people, right? That
Hmm.
is Active Directory, right? And or it is Okta or whatever you're using. So it's important, and this is the other sort of really important thing about a semantic layer platform. It's got to integrate with everything,
Mm,
right? So it can't be its own thing. So it's to the extent that it's got to integrate with Active
that's
Directory,
fine.
it's got to integrate with Snowflake, it's got to integrate with Tableau and Power BI and everything else. So it's got to be everything to all people on both ends of the spectrum. And user identity management is really important because you don't want to have to redefine your groups and your users in your semantic layer because
Right.
that's also likely to conflict with what the users and groups have that's been defined for your Snowflake or for your Tableau for that matter. So
Right.
it's got to work seamlessly.
That's to play well with others, as they say, right?
Yes,
Well, it
exactly.
makes complete sense because the meanings and the aggregates that you're defining in this layer are coming from the data, which is at the, let's call it the persisted layer, right? That's the data. And in between that is the semantics and then the people who are using this stuff. And you want to be able to have some dynamic capability to change things and have that flow. Once it's changed, now it's in the matrix, it's flowing just in this new way, basically. And of course, you can roll back or do other things like that. But no,
Hmm.
this is good stuff. All right, we got another couple segments coming up. We do want to talk a little bit about the Semantic Layer Summit that's coming up
Hmm.
April 24th at scale.com. Go online and check that out, folks. And I do, before the show is over, I want to get your thoughts on some of these large language models and what they're doing and what they're going to be doing to the business, to the enterprise, because they're not just text generative in nature. There are other things that they do that are pretty darn interesting. And I'm curious to get the thoughts of Dave Mariani on the whole large language model phenomenon that is taking the world by storm, because it is absolutely taking the world by storm. I mean, it has sucked all the oxygen out of the room for now, at least in AI. And I keep reminding people there is traditional old fashioned AI out there, which still works very well. And there's causal AI. I'm writing something about that today, right now, as a matter of fact. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Okay.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Dave Mariani of At Scale and the Semantic Layer Summit. Year 4, I've been tracking it each and every year. It seems to be getting bigger and better, which is impressive stuff. I mentioned it's a record breaking topic for our audience. So obviously, our folks love that. What's the theme this year? Who are some of the big speakers? Tell us some fun things to look forward to.
Well, you sort of talked a little bit about generative AI, so that's semantics are very important in Gen AI, but all and large language models. But we'll leave that for a little bit later. So what we like to do, Eric, is we like to sort of bring in industry leaders to talk about doing real work and doing real work. In this case, of course, with semantic layers, and so we had some great folks like Anna Marie Steverson, who's from Netflix, about how to implement a semantic layer. We got
Wow.
great luminaries like Bill Inman to talk about data lakes and data warehouses. We got people from Colin Taggart from John Deere, who is talking about what are some of the best practices when to operate a semantic layer. And we got just some great panels, and we got a great session with Juan Cicada.
Oh,
Juan
sure.
wrote that paper that you probably everybody's read about semantics and LLMs. And so he has a presentation that takes the audience through what his results were. He ran a benchmark and the like. Sanjeev Mohan is, we love Sanjeev. It's always about talking about what the future looks like and what we should be focused on. So a lot of really great content. And what I would say is, like, we have some, as at scale in the keynote, we're gonna do some really exciting demos. We have some really major product announcements to go public with. So we're really excited about that, and that we'll cover those in the keynote
That's
part
great.
of the conference.
Yeah, well, I can see with a client like Netflix, first of all, what a great use case for a semantic layer because you have all these movies, you have the profiles of the users, you have these engines that are trying to share ideas about what someone may want to watch. I'll throw out a funny quote. You always have to read the comments these days in articles, right, to get the funny quotes on things. And some guy was talking about an article about artificial general intelligence and red robots, all this stuff. And some guy wrote, "Yeah, I'll be impressed when Netflix predicts a movie I really like." I thought that was kind of dark. It's a difficult thing to do because personal taste in movies, it's hard to manage. But I can tell you, with a semantic layer like at scales, I can see how you could have multiple layers of meaning and multiple filters that you could be running to kind of track and see because a company like Netflix has the engineering capacity. So you can not only get ideas of what to recommend, but then you can have an engine that also tracks, okay, well, I recommended this and he said he didn't like it. I recommended that. She said she didn't like it. Those kinds of things can be tracked over time, and that gets very useful. And not just saying you liked it or didn't like it, but actually monitoring the behavior,
There
right?
you
Like
go.
this gets into things like surveys, and I love surveys, but people will answer surveys in a certain way and they'll act sometimes in a different way. So
Hmm.
it's important to be able to take that with a grain of salt and understand it and then really monitor that user behavior. I think that's where a lot of the action is these days, and that's where a lot of the big giants like Google and Facebook or Meta or whatever, they've been tracking that for a while. Human behavioral activities, what they mean, what does all this stuff mean? Because the metrics can be nonsense. I mean, I'm a big fan of X still, Twitter, call it X, whatever. I like it a lot, but there's a reporting number that they have, or I don't know if they still have it, but it was called digital expand, right? So if you're
Hmm.
like running your analytics, you're like, oh, 24 digital expands. Oh, isn't that exciting? Let me tell you, I never, ever once have intended to enact a digital expand. It's always an accident. It's always like, okay, I meant to click on that and I clicked on this instead. So that's the kind of thing where you have to use the human brain to read through the numbers and to understand what's really happening. And that again is where a semantic layer comes in handy, right?
Yeah, it's like it's a big data problem, right? Because you're right that it's people, when the things that people look for, search for, buy, those are the best signals, right? Not
Right.
not what you ask
Right.
them, it's what they do.
Right. That's right.
And
That's funny.
so my love of data sort of came up from that sort of behavioral analytics segment, right? So I talked to you about I sold my first analytics company to an email marketing platform, the first guys to do that. So it was
Wow.
about email marketing, about who's responding, who's opening, who's clicking, like you said, and how long are they on, and are they buying, are they converting, and then and I took that and I went to display advertising, so a display advertising network. So now it's like even deeper sort of
Right.
amounts of data. And then went to Yahoo, where we took that on, took that where it was truly big data before big data was born. And the thing is like it's everything is big data now. Everybody is tracking these user behaviors, and so because of that, that's why the cloud and cloud data platforms exist, because you need that sort of unlimited scale. You need to
Right.
sort of something that grows with you, but your analytics need to keep pace, and you can't keep track of it if you don't have a semantic models to turn those bits and bytes into something that's actually actionable by the business.
That's such a good point. And there's so much information out there. I think that's probably the hardest challenge. And Doug Laney, of course, coined this the three V's, right? Velocity,
Mm-hmm.
variety, and volume. And I think to a lot of casual business users, maybe they don't appreciate the magnitude of this reality and what
Mm-hmm.
it means to be able to glean some insight from these massive amounts of data. There are a lot of different things you can do. I mean, we're working with a company that dot, they do streaming graph. I'm like, streaming graph. Wow. Tell me about that. It's very interesting stuff. It's very compelling. It's a different way of doing things, right? Streaming analytics, it's not new, but it hasn't been prominent. But, in the data warehousing world, we have this mindset of creating a schema, you load all your data. It used to be a very time-intensive process. Now it's not so much. But what it gets me excited about the semantic layer and what you folks at Scale are doing is that you are, again, enabling companies to leverage the innovation underneath and the ideas on the other side, right? And you're kind of in between all that. So you can stay on top of what Snowflakes does and Databricks and BigQuery and all these guys what they
Yep.
do, and you can leverage that while still maintaining your independence, if you will, of the marshaling area of meaning and aggregations. Is that about right?
Precisely, precisely. I call it standing on the shoulders of giants, and that's not mine. That's somebody else's. I don't know who quoted that, but I think that's the right approach. It's like, you innovate. Don't innovate in greenfield, right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to do something what somebody else does better, because not only is it futile and you're going to probably lose, but
Right.
you also create issues for customers, right? I
Right.
mean, customers now have another thing. So I'm kind of a little bit OCD, Eric. So like so I'm always trying to get rid of stuff
Mm,
and consolidate. And so it drives me crazy when I see one thing that looks like something else and they're doing about the same thing and they coexist. Like,
right.
nope. So
It's
you gotta eliminate, reduce.
it's good to have that OCD in the technology world. I gave a talk in New York last week at the Data Universe event. I was one of my favorite titles ever. The word technical is in parentheses, and the title was "Forever in Your Technical Debt," right? And it's all
I
about
love that.
just how much of that stuff there is out there, and it's mind numbing. I would not want to be a CTO or a CIO these days. I guess it could be exciting, but oh my God, just
Stuff.
thinking about the array, the topography of madness out there that has just been churning away and churning away. And like, how do you enable yourself to get that house in order to be able to do the cool new stuff with AI? And that's a lot of governance, it's a lot of data management, it's a lot of what you suggest, which is kind of pruning, right? You're pruning your information landscape to get it nice and clean and healthy. And what's the old line? Like you're no nearer when you're pruning something because you're engaged in the
Hmm.
process and you're learning about it. And that's what these projects are about: data governance projects, data catalogs, implementing data
Hmm.
catalogs. I get excited about that because in the process of doing that, as one of my consultant friends from Athena Solutions said, Ala Zakin, she said, it forces the business to focus. I was like,
Hmm.
wow, that's pretty cool because it's hard to get people to focus. They have all this other
Hmm.
stuff they have to do. They come into a meeting, oh gosh, another meeting, let's get through this thing. But if they're focused, you can learn a
Hmm.
tremendous amount and you can solve a whole lot of problems and really grease the tracks to an analytical future that is beneficial for everyone. But folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. Don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Yeah, love that idea. Yep, yep, yep.
All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a great show with Dave Mariani of At Scale, co-founder and CTO. The Semantic Layer Summit coming up April 24th. Hop online. I'm sure it's going to be recorded. So if you miss it, don't worry. You can go back and watch a lot of great speakers. And you mentioned generative AI and LLMs. And I'll tell you, when I think about this stuff, I want to give you the vision of what I think is the ideal executive cockpit because I understand a fair amount now about how these things work. It's very interesting. The parameters, how they adjust their weights and biases when you train them, get your RAG model with a vector database and publish that with your curated data. So they're like anchors of truth. Like I get all this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself that sometime in the not too distant future, the ideal executive cockpit will be a front end of an LLM of some kind. And then in the background, your embeddings will be, of course, your highly curated data. You'll get to a certain point, maybe data warehouse information gets fed into their clickstream analysis, financial information, whatever you want gets embedded. And then you set up real-time feeds, like whether it's Kafka or some other streaming engine, will populate all the changes to that environment such that the executive can just sit there and ask question after question after question. What should I do in my business? What's going well? What's not going well? And then take actions. Okay. Get a meeting with all my senior VPs to discuss such and such. Boom. And it just goes and finds time and then bing, comes back and then you have your meeting. To me, that's the future. And I think every senior executive is going to want something just like that. I mean, if you look, SAP had some product, it was like executive dashboards. It was, of course, I'm sure very
Hmm.
expensive and just a bunch of dashboards. And what underneath it is what's important. But what do you think about that idea? Is that doable? Does that sound like the future to you? What do you think?
Mm. I think it's yes, I think it's doable, but I think something's missing today. So I'm a big Chat GPT user. I use it to help me write. I use it to not just write English, but write code as well. And I find it really useful. And it's a huge productivity tool. But the one thing like, a lot of people out there are talking about text to SQL. And really that's kind of ultimately what you're talking about, Eric, is to be able to operationalize what you just said
Hmm.
is that you got to somehow query a database somewhere to get that information. And my sense was that, gosh, without context, without semantics, how is the LLM going to know what gross margin is? Because,
Right.
for my business, I just said gross margin is income minus expense minus discounts. Somebody else may have 15 other factors involved in it. So how is it that, that a generalized general purpose LLM is going to do that without context? And so that was always sort of my gut. But Juan Cicada of Data.World, he did a study that said, okay, let's compare an LLM's accuracy without semantics to one with
Wow.
semantics.
Wow.
And and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but after he did different like numbers of tables that needed to be queried to answer the question. And after I think four tables, the LLM had a zero accuracy level.
Oh no. That's pretty funny. That's not good.
With semantic context, the numbers are absolutely, stunningly different. So I can't wait for that world, but I think that what I'm excited about is bringing business context to those enterprises who want to move beyond the general purpose LLM into
Right.
something that is going to answer the questions for their business, not
Right.
somebody else's business, not everybody's business, their business. And for that, they need to have that semantic context. And that's
Yeah.
that's my take on I think what's missing today. And so we're working with our partners, our data platform partners, to do that integration. Um, so stay tuned,
That's
honestly.
great. I think you're exactly right. And it's going to be in the RAG model, is my guess. You will have
Mhm.
either it's when it goes out or when it comes back, or even both. You go through the semantic layer to go, okay, these are the things I'm really looking for. Go through the trusted data. This is the fact set I want you to look at. Now, LLM, go ahead and generate your text, your response, and then check it again on the way back, right? I mean, there is a performance issue, but you want to be careful about these things. But goodness gracious, the speed that you can get from using these technologies, you have to
Mhm.
use them somehow, some way. And I guess my message to the vendor community at large is they're going to use them. It's almost like
Yes.
you look at what the iPad did to enterprise IT with bring your own device. That was
Hmm.
anathema back then. I mean, back in the day, like you were not supposed to do such things. Guess what? The
Hmm.
CEO came with the iPad, said, "Tough patooties. I'm using it.
Yeah.
Get over it."
And yeah, get over it is right.
And that's exactly what's going to happen with these LLMs. So I'm glad that folks like you are working on that semantic layer so we get there responsibly and we don't wind up violating trust, right? Last final comments.
I love it. I couldn't agree with you more. So it's a brave new world. I think that that text at English or whatever your language is the new computer interface. And
Yeah,
so can't wait
no,
to see what
wow.
happens next.
I love it. Folks, hop online at scale.com, April 24th, Semantic Layer Summit, year four. Look up Dave Mariani as well. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to DM Radio.